Okay, welcome back to Roundtable. Today we're going to talk about fatigue management, what we consider fatigue to be, managing fatigue across the week and across the block, going into different size differences with fatigue and deloads. So what do you guys consider fatigue to be with training?
So I think when we look at fatigue, right, there's signs that we can pick out to notice when fatigue's starting to come up. But I think it all points towards like a drop in training performance,
Yeah.
right? So like if you're not able to increase load from what you were doing last week or the previous couple of weeks, you can start to consider fatigue as a factor. But before that happens, sometimes people might notice it coming up before, like just subjectively, the bar's starting to move a bit slower.
Yeah.
They're more irritable. Like things just aren't well geared to perform.
Yeah.
And that's when it's on the athlete to be able to notice those things because they'll be able to have a good gauge on how they're feeling before the session.
What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I agree. Like it's multifactorial, right? Like fatigue and how different people perceive it and feel it.
Yeah.
For myself, like I start to notice, like not in training as much because I'll kind of will find a way to almost put load on the bar regardless. But I find external things start to change. And that's when I notice that like fatigue is really starting to actually creep in for myself, like individually. Like that's when like sleep starts to be broken, my appetite starts to drop off. I'll be up and I wake up feeling really, really fresh, right? And then within 3 to 4 hours, I'm just tired again for no reason, even if I haven't done anything. And I know that's when I'm like, okay, like, I'm starting to feel a bit fatigued now. So I guess like looking from like a coaching point of view, it's if an athlete can acknowledge those kind of things as well before we get this performance drop off, because the performance drop off usually happens after that.
Yeah.
And it's like how to acknowledge it and how to kind of work around it. Or, it's also like, okay, if we're pushing every single day, how can we manage that throughout the week so we are still able to perform on the days that we want to perform, even if we are feeling fatigued? Because fatigue's not necessarily a bad thing if we're trying to accumulate it. But we need to be able to manage it throughout the week too. So it's like, okay, we're going to get to a point where, although we're trying to increase, load on like a non-primary day or something that's not the higher performing day that we're kind of trying to chase, maybe that other day that we're doing, so most people, they did squat or deadlift 2 times frequency or something. Maybe that other day just has to be a bit more static there, or may have a drop off in performance on that day so we can still flourish on the day that we want to be able to perform, rather than being like, okay, let's just pull everything back and deload. Because we can still find a way to keep going through the block, rather than just like, I guess, like scrapping everything and pulling it back to baseline again.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point of reactive programming, right?
Yeah, it's not just reactive programming, it's also reactive performance from an athlete point of view as well, and just being able to auto-regulate and acknowledge that, like, okay, the day that I'm trying to or want to perform the better on, it's not happening at the moment because I'm probably pushing the day that doesn't need to be pushed as much too far.
Yep. What do you think?
To add to that as well, like if you are able to manage fatigue correctly within a block, like that can buy you an extra 1 to 2 weeks on in terms of like performance within a block, right? And you compound that over the course of multiple blocks, you're getting top end performance more regularly throughout the training year. So it ends up, compounding in a very substantial way because all those times that you do manage fatigue, they're for most likely top end strength.
Yeah.
And therefore you're going to get more stimulus that way if you are managing fatigue symptoms that way. Touching on what Steve said, right? Like training performance is probably the last thing that happens before as fatigue shows up. Like it's probably the latest indicator, and it's very clear for anyone to see that like if training started to drop off, then it's like a deload was probably needed within that week already, or like the week prior, right? And like you said, there's other signs such as mood, appetite. I think all those things are also like late indicators. Like if that's already starting to show up, you could have probably already managed fatigue prior to that as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So when we're programming, what are some things we can do in the program to help athletes manage fatigue?
I think, oh, you go, Steve.
I touch on communication a bit more. Like it's if it's that, like if it's the fact that like everything's being pushed too hard and we're starting to accumulate fatigue way too rapidly, then it's just that communication of like, hey, look, like the RPE or what we've been prescribing on this other day hasn't changed. Like we are going to make like proper adaptations, right, to the movement, but if I haven't changed it, it's almost for a reason. Like it doesn't mean that you don't have to fucking plus 10 every week just because that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Danny.
And you can just leave it.
That sounded personal.
It's not personal at all. It's see it everywhere. People like we feel it, but we feel adaptations. But like if the RPE is the same, like it almost doesn't suffice the plus 10 kilos, right?
Yeah.
It's like plus 2.5 to 5 is good if you're getting the proper adaptations that we're talking about and trying to achieve throughout that mesocycle, right? So you don't have to keep adding the same amount of load that you've added every week on the same day. Like it can fluctuate in how much you add.
Yeah.
It's also like if we're adding,
put up like a argumentative point after. Sorry, you go. You finish your point.
Yeah, keep
so
going.
if we're adding then to the main day, right? We're adding to the week.
Yeah.
So that's where you're managing fatigue properly and performing on the day that you want to perform rather than just like adding everything, because we're trying to add through the week, not just every single day.
Yeah.
And that's how we can manage it to be able to perform well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of that, right, like if you are able, so touching on Steve saying like you don't have to always add the same amount of load.
Yeah.
I think that comes down to understanding how sensitive you are to fatigue and like how long you can last in a block, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are going guns blazing and you know that you don't last very long in a block, like that's gonna shorten the block even more and it might not even be productive. Like for example, if your blocks are already 4 weeks short or 4 weeks long and you then try to be aggressive with it, it might cut it to only 2 or 3 weeks, which might make that window of creating adaptations even shorter than almost necessary. Because if you're only going to progressively overload before needing a deload for like 2 weeks, it's not in the grand scheme of things going to do much.
Yep.
So to Steve's point, if you notice that you do respond in a way where, like fatigue starts to run up when you do dramatically increase load, and that goes for most people, like then it is a good idea to potentially look at the kind of jumps that you're making and ways that you are acutely spiking your fatigue, whether that's like adding everything on every single day when it's not necessary, like not prioritizing certain days. But yeah, at the same time, to argue against that, if you do have a good understanding of fatigue and you intentionally add load to the days that like are set up to push, such as like a primary day, then it can end up creating this rhythm of recovery so long as you're mature enough and acknowledge that fatigue will be present on those secondary days where you are meant to like cap yourself, right?
And then you auto-regulate.
Yeah, and then you auto-regulate. And then that ends up utilizing the block in a very intentional way because you are trying to, essentially max out the progress within a block. And if you are able to acknowledge it then you can still yield those extra 1 to 2 weeks with fatigue management in place.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That was a very big spiel.
Was that your argument?
Yeah, I was like, what, this guy plus 10's not bad. But at the same time, yeah, I will admit that did shorten my blocks as well. So I think on my end, in terms of like fatigue management, right, like the biggest things was that wouldn't have happened if like food, nutrition, sleep are all on point. They have to be on point for that to work.
Yeah.
Otherwise you'd have to auto-regulate and you wouldn't be able to make such aggressive attempts. right? So it is very contextual to the athlete and how they are preparing session to session.
And I think it also, like I touched on, like you don't, like once you start on a +10 train, you don't have to keep going +10.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
I touched on that with you as well. Like you don't have to keep doing this, Dan. And you're like, oh, I didn't even consider that at this point, right? Like you're too far gone past that, but it's like you don't have to be able to perform when you want to perform. And then when you did that, you performed extremely well when we wanted to.
Yep. We
Now,
could touch upon like how we managed fatigue for that last session, because to give context, I've just been going like +10 every week just because I've been in a surplus and I've been wanting to take advantage of it. But in this previous training block, like my block is only lasting 3 weeks when on average it's been lasting like 4 to 6 weeks. And in going into that fourth week, I was communicating to Steve like, hey, my fatigue's starting to run up. I don't think I can properly push a fourth week. And he said, like, you can auto regulate. And so my strategy for that was, because I have like 3 squat days in a week, that middle day was where I decided to like auto regulate quite aggressively. But that's with communication with Steve and understanding like we can do that as athletes in order to maximize performance on a given day. And then after that, he could like properly deload to ensure that like, we stay healthy through that period.
how did that
Yeah.
block end? Did you hit a PR at all?
Yeah, that was 230 for 2. That wouldn't have been possible with auto regulating that final week.
Yeah, without auto regulating that final week.
Yeah, I was ruined that first day. The first day of squatting in that week, I was feeling terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Denny said he's like, what did you say? I don't feel ruined. I feel ruined for programming purposes only.
I think it's important to know as an athlete what that feels like though.
Yeah,
Oh
definitely.
yeah.
Like because it is a part of peaking for sure. So, if you can handle it and you want to push yourself that hard as an athlete, I think it's a good thing to do. Not all of
Yeah,
it.
it definitely is, like, because you want to get a super conversation effect when we get on the platform, right? So it's like managing fatigue. For me, like I struggle to not feel fatigue. I struggle to admit it
Yeah, a lot of people do, yeah.
and be like, yeah, I'm fucking beat. Like it's taken me a couple of weeks to acknowledge that I'm definitely tired, and there's like appetites drop, sleeps all over the place. Like I said earlier, like I'm feeling tired when I shouldn't be tired, not wanting to do little things, but I'm just like, I've created so much of a habitual routine now to kind of be able to perform that I'm still getting up and doing the things that I don't want to do, not just training wise, but like my whole, like I'm going into Worlds, right? So my whole life day schedule is set around training at the moment. And it's like, got to go on these walks, got to go do these like, movement things that I'm doing at home, got to be still doing these, even when all I want to do is fucking sit down and sleep or something. But still just getting up to do them, even though I've started to acknowledge over the last like week that I'm like getting there, getting tired.
Do you think it's because and I see this a bit with athletes, especially the ones who really want to push themselves, not acknowledging fatigue because you subconsciously associate it with feeling weaker?
Yeah. So it's like we don't want the weights to feel
Heavy,
right?
Heavy,
like,
yeah.
because that sucks. And it's like hitting a weight that we've already hit multiple times, and then it moves the way that it moves, which isn't good. Can be demoralizing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like not acknowledging fatigue. We kind of just are like, why the fuck am I regressing? But we're not regressing. You're just fatigued.
Yep.
You've still done what you've done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like to
And
that
I can
point as
acknowledge that
well.
from a coaching point of view. Like I can acknowledge that for my athletes, but as an athlete, I struggle
Yeah,
because
definitely.
I'm in this mindset of just like, and like almost where Denny was last block, like he forgot how to auto regulate almost, like because we get so hyper fixated on being athletes and wanting to push. But that's why we hire coaches, right? Because we need that second set of eyes to be like, oh yeah, this
You're going
is
too
what's
far.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what's happening, and this is what you need to do to be able to counterbalance that. But that's also why athletes have coaches, because a lot of high level athletes wouldn't be able to kind of rein themselves back in. Whereas at the high level, right, all we need coaches for is almost to footy coach us into being like, hey, settle the fuck down.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're running yourself into the ground, or like you need to go a little bit harder. Like you don't even seem like you're trying at the moment. What's going on, like externally or something?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
For sure.
To that point as well, like after you start to feel that, right? Like if you look at the week prior, it's probably been like slowly accumulating and coming up in performance to almost like a rep PR, some sort of ability PR, right? And then the week that you do start to feel fatigue, it's like you automatically assume that you're just getting weaker,
Well,
and
you
you'll
need,
have like this. Exactly. All you need is a deload or something to just pull you back, and
yep.
that strength will come back up again.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's really important to acknowledge though that some lifters or a lot of lifters don't need a full deload when that happens. They just need a slight pullback.
Yeah, it's when to like fully deload someone and just like pull them back. Like for Danny, this last week that we did, it was a full deload. And it's one of the first full deloads that I've prescribed Danny in a
Very
very,
long time.
very long time. Very long
After
time.
the
But
after the plus 10 block.
it was kind of like 2 blocks where he just kept going and going and going. So it was like this is accumulated for far too long, and it was more just. It wasn't like, oh, if I just like kind of pull him back a little bit and we just kick started again, he'll be fine. But it's more of the fact that he's progressing at a rapid rate right now that I need to kind of control this so he doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, exactly. It's and that all comes to communication. And I think understanding that fatigue runs from block to block. It doesn't, you don't just automatically start again. Like, it's acknowledging that, the fatigue is still there from two blocks ago. And so if you don't have that deload, you run the risk of running into a wall type thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about fatigue resistant lifters, because both, I don't know, I think you do too, Danny. I know Steve and I have a couple of lifters on our list who aren't very good with acute fatigue at all. So once they go over a certain RP, they just die. What have you guys noticed with those types of lifters? And what are some strategies that you guys use?
Very sensitive kind of fatigue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's the communication side of things as well. And I've noticed it's very intensity based.
Yep.
So it's not really volume based. It's very like if you hit over a certain threshold of intensity on like a single or something, you're ruined for almost a week or so. So it's like we can only touch on this when we need to touch on this, and then it's almost like an upward downward trend. They got to be really good with auto regulating. The block itself, like numbers can be all over the place, but it is really treating RPE to the truest form, almost like a very RIR kind of response.
Yep.
Rather than being like, we can't be just like plus every week, because that accumulates far too much. And then once you hit that certain threshold, and say for an individual, it's like a RPE 7 to 8, they go past that, and can almost just be a downward spiral if they keep trying to add after that, or even try and match that again. So it's like, just like pulling it back, but letting them know like, hey, like you're very sensitive to this, and this is why this has happened. And it's very hard for someone, because obviously there's no person on my roster who's a high level lifter and wants to really, really do well, who's very fatigue sensitive. And we didn't acknowledge that initially until like we had a terrible peak, because it was going too hard, and then it was just stale for the rest of it. And then it was like, now we've acknowledged that, and now we can we know like, okay, go time. And then you like, even though it doesn't feel like you've had to train super duper hard leading into it, the taper will almost be like earned just from pushing once or twice.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's hard to acknowledge it as well, because it kind of comes out of nowhere too. They just die.
Yeah, it's just death, and then it's like 3 weeks of shit.
Yeah. Yeah. So with those types of lifters, do you prescribe, or do you just say to them or is it on them to be super good with RPE?
It's on them, but it's also on me, like big time, to be like, this is go time now.
Yep.
This is the week that I want you to go, and then let's like James, all right? Because James is one of them that's super sensitive to fatigue. So I've said to him like, this week their week, because of the way that his training's laid out for Worlds, because he competes on Thursday. He had his last heavy squat like that he'll hit load wise just now, just last night, because I know that he's going to be traveling next week, and we don't know how the travel is going to affect next week if he were to squat on the Wednesday when he's traveling on Tuesday.
Yep.
So I was like, I want go this week, and if we get a down week the next week, as long as you hit the prescribed RPE, I don't care what the load is on the bar, because we know what happens to your body.
Yep.
But because he'll be deadlifting prior to flying out, I'll have him deadlifting heavy before he leaves. So it's almost backwards, right? Almost we do usually we do the last heavy deadlift before we do the last heavy squat. But for him, I've got that last heavy squat's already done, and then he'll do another heavy deadlift, but he'll still have a high exerted squat when he's in London.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very similar to Callan's deadlift. So he can't push both deadlift days. So he's started to pull back his deadlift earlier in the week. Then he'll squat, and then he actually deadlifts heavy the day after, but he will run his deadlift into the competition this time. So because he can't last for more than 3 weeks with his deadlift, so he'll have this week will be a little bit of a down week, and then the next 2 weeks will go, if that makes sense. And the first day will be controlled, and then the second day it's just he's only got 5 reps on that day now. That's all he can handle. And that took ages and so many different things to figure out. Hey, so for him,
so he's just got 5 reps on his secondary.
On his primary day, he's got 5 reps.
Yep.
All up.
How did it feel initially programming that? Were you almost like worried about the workload?
Okay, because I've seen it work with other lifters as well. And with him, the workload just needed to go less and less. So we started with sets of 6, and then 3 sets of 6, and it was just running into a wall. Then I went 2 sets of 6, running into a wall, and that's on the secondary day. And then there was just no rep scheme that really worked on the primary day to make it progress. So I just had to keep going less and less, and this is the best it's felt. So whereas before it was like so much fatigue, he'd be like, I don't know, I'm not sure. But now it's like he's actually able to say Saturday is on. Saturday feels great. So it's just finding that. And I think having experience with other lifters as well that have such low deadlift volume, that I felt okay doing it. Sometimes it's crazy how much lifters don't need. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about size differences then. What have you guys noticed the biggest thing with size differences with managing the fatigue?
So as you mentioned earlier, Kelly, with most people not needing to get this huge deload, right? Like just a slight pullback is enough.
Yep.
That's usually pretty correlated with like lighter lifters, people that aren't able to lift as much absolute load.
Yep.
Therefore, they don't need that huge drop. So whether that's like reduction in rep count, set count, and combination of intensity as well, all that put together is quite a lot.
Yep.
Right. So if you're just going to manipulate one of those things, I think that would be sufficient for someone who's like a lighter lifter. But then as you start getting heavier and you're moving more absolute load, like you're going to need to manipulate a combination of those things.
Yep.
Like volume has been like correlated with fatigue as well, right? So if you take out more volume, that's going to take out more fatigue because that contributes more. But I found also reducing intensity so that then still not moving something that's substantial within that deload week, or people that also do move more absolute load will need a bigger deload as well, like that true deload. But if you also reduce intensity as well, that also keeps them healthy. I found people that are quite strong, like they need that down period.
Yeah.
For sure. Do you have any outliers when it comes to that?
In terms of like people that don't fit that mold, like generally I still run like traditional deloads for people, like irrespective of size differences. Like if people are going through like an injury or something like that, then
Yeah.
like a traditional deload might just ensure that they stay healthy block
Yeah.
to block, because that's the most important thing. Because if we start to assume like, oh, they're starting to get healthy, let's run a back-to-back block without like a volume drop or something like that. Like we run the risk of it just stalling in that second block, I found. So I've just got to be careful there. But as for like a case study on like someone who's sensitive and needs an extra deload, not really, to be honest.
Yeah. What
Not
about you?
off the top of my head.
You got anyone who needs a full deload every time they start a new block?
Some bigger people.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's like a full deload, but it is quite a big drop off in that week one. But they get like big jumps, right? It's like plus 25 the next week, and then plus 20 again or something. Like,
Yep.
It's just like washes out a lot, but still holds on to enough.
Yep.
And you know, they someone that, you know, they'll deadlift 200 to 280 to 300 kilos in like week one or something. So it's like, and that's their deload.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different. That sort of person we gets like almost a deload, but they do it themselves, right? Because they start to feel beat after like 4 weeks. And then 4 weeks is the fourth week is usually their PR across the board, almost every block. So they almost just like earn it, and then they pull it back and then run it again. And it's almost not me really prescribing it in terms of like just like percentage capping them or fully deloading them. It's just themselves kind of just like, I guess, like leaning into just like, oh, I'm going to deload, and then they just do it, and it works well every time. So just leave it.
Yeah. It's good. One thing I did notice that I've been trialing since we've spoken about it not long ago was the week zeros. So
That's just deloading.
Yeah, I actually ended up doing that with Tom Chaplin's squat into the competition. He ended up running 5-week blocks to last 2 blocks for 5 weeks with a week 0, and it worked really, really well. Just gave him that extra week to recover.
Yeah.
What are you doing in the week 0?
Just no top sets. So no top set on deadlift and no top set on squat. And then there was an extra week. So it's just and reduced volume in terms of intensity, not set count.
Yeah. And this comes after like the back end of last block. No deload on the end of that block, right? So this is that deload week.
Yeah. But he's the type of lifter that does PR at the end of his blocks, or goes very close. Yeah, big jumps, you know. So earns that deload, or earns that week 1. You know. Cool. I think that's about it. Is there anything else that we wanted to go over this morning?
I think we covered fatigue quite well.
I think the biggest thing, you know, that to take away from it is, if you can manage it in the week more than letting it go and then having to pack up and do a deload.
Yeah,
ensuring that you're training hard enough.
Hey, ensuring that you're training hard enough to earn one.
Yeah.
Don't be
also
plus 10.
Manage the externals.
Yeah.
Because they're going to play a role. Like I would say, like, don't say like training is getting too hard if you're not managing the things around it.
Definitely.
From an athlete point of view, because that's really where you can get an extra week or 2 if you just start sleeping better or eating better, or, you know, moving a bit more, or something so small that can make a huge difference. Because all these little like 1% of things, they all compound, right?
Yep.
You can do all them, they can help you manage the fatigue a lot better.
Yep. And if you have the lifestyle where you can't do that, just
you can do it.
Yeah, learn to manage the load on the bar a little bit better.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're using like a lifestyle, like you can't do it as an excuse, like I think that's a bit bullshit. Because I've had that kind of lifestyle where I work 14-hour days, but I was still able to manage everything. So when people say that to me, I'm like, okay, like I've been there.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, like, don't say you want it that bad if you aren't willing to sacrifice a little bit.
Yeah.
Because those small things don't take much. Like looking after your nutrition is, sometimes it's just like meal prepping or tracking your food or something. It's not that hard. Sleeping's not hard. Oh, these little things aren't that hard. It's just get off your phone. Meal prep your food, and then there's other things, to go for a small walk. And if most of the time if that person's like working, and that's the main reason why their lifestyle doesn't allow for them to be able to manage fatigue, it's not hard to go for a bit of a walk or just like move throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a difference between different people though. Like some people will lean on that and say like, oh, my job's too hard, whereas other people will be like, no, I've set my heart on being great and I've said I'm going to do it, so I'll make a few sacrifices and make it work.
Yeah. Yep. And I guess that's like that in any sport really, isn't it? Or anything that people do in their life, if they want to be good at it, you've got to sacrifice shit for it, hey?
Yep.
Yep. All right, guys. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.